Written language is a key part of human society. It allows us to communicate ideas between ourselves using a system of signs and symbols that can be strung together to create all sorts of different meanings. In the same way, music notation is a system of characters and signs that allows us to communicate musical ideas between ourselves. It gives us information about how loud or quiet a specific phrase is, the interval of time note or rest occupies, how fast or slow we should perform a piece, and much more. You'll first need to develop an understanding of music notation before you can read and execute the information in a piece of sheet music, so today we'll be going over all sorts of traditional music notation you'll see in your musical career. My name is Elliot Duran. Let's go ahead and jump into the first chapter of the basics, music notation. When writing something like an essay, the lines on our notebook paper or invisible guides on our word processing applications give us a way to string our letters into words and our words into sentences in a neat and orderly way. In the context of sheet music, a staff is what provides the guides we use to put down our notes and markings in an orderly way, and they're traditionally drawn as a set of 5 lines and 4 spaces. The verticality of the 5 lines and spaces provide information about pitch for instruments like a trumpet or piano that can actually produce different pitches. Because we'll be focusing on developing a strong rhythmic foundation before bringing pitch into the equation, we're going to reduce our own staff down to only 1 line. If a staff holds the lines that we write onto, then the rhythmic hierarchy of note values and rests are the alphabets that we use to communicate information about the length of every note and interval of silence in music. By stringing the symbols from these hierarchies together, we can create endless combinations of rhythms with varying degrees of complexity. Let's look at the rhythmic hierarchy of note values first. If you look towards the top of the chart, you'll see a note shaped similarly to an O. This note is called a whole note, and it sits at the very top of the hierarchy because it holds the longest duration of any note in the chart. The rest of the note values below are named based on their binary relation to the whole note. Let's unpack what this binary relationship means with some visuals. Imagine a block of certain length, which we'll call 1 unit long. Let's say we want to divide this block into 2 pieces that are as equal as possible. The solution is simple. You would simply make a cut exactly down the middle of the block. This creates 2 blocks that are each half of the length of the original block, or half a unit long. What if we'd like to have 4 blocks that are as equal as possible? The solution again is intuitive. We take our blocks that are each half of a unit long and cut each of them straight down the middle, yielding 4 blocks that are now a quarter of the length of the original block, or a quarter of a unit long. What if we wanted to do the opposite and turn a couple of our quarter-sized pieces back into a block that's half the length of our starting block? We take some glue and attach the 2 pieces together because 2 pieces that are a quarter of a unit long will add up to be a half a unit long. At this point, you probably noticed a pattern. No matter how you want to manipulate the length or number of your blocks, it will always involve either a clean cut down the middle, causing a division in length by 2, or a joining of 2 equal sized pieces, causing a multiplication in length by 2. We can therefore describe the relationship of these blocks to each other as binary, a word whose dictionary definition reads composed of or involving 2 things. Our musical notes work in the same way, so let's apply this information to our rhythmic hierarchy. The whole note is the same as the original block that we discussed in the visual example. Instead of being a physical item that's 1 unit long, however, the whole note represents a duration of sound that's 1 unit long. If we wanted to separate the whole note into 2 equal notes, we'd split it right down the middle, generating 2 notes that each hold half of the value of the whole note. Very appropriately, these are called half notes. If we wanted 4 notes that fit within the space of a whole note, we'd repeat what we did in the visual example and take each of our half notes and split them evenly down the middle, generating a total of 4 notes that each hold only a quarter of the space that a whole note does, and these are called quarter notes. The great thing about a system like this is that it works intuitively in terms of the math behind the music. If an eighth note holds an eighth of the value that a whole note does, then it makes sense that you need to put 8 eighth notes together to add up to the full value of a whole note. Conversely, if you wanted to split a whole note up into 8 equal notes, then you'd break it up into 8 eighth notes. The hierarchy works in this way all the way from whole notes to 16th notes and beyond, and the rules to travel through the tiers can be summed up like this. To travel down a tier, we are dividing the value of the original tier in half, resulting in 2 new notes that when put together take up the same amount of space that 1 note from the original tier held. If we want to travel up a tier, we must double the note value of the starting tier, resulting in only 1 note that will take up the exact amount of space that 2 notes in the starting tier held when added together. This is called subdivision, and the fact that the system works so elegantly is no coincidence. It was designed in this way to give musicians a neat and even musical grid to perform within, that also gives them clear ways of checking whether every single note is being placed exactly where it goes. The opposite of sound is silence, and just like we have a notation system to indicate when we're going to play, we also have one to indicate when we shouldn't play. These intervals of silence are called rests, and they have their own set of symbols to indicate the duration of silence. Luckily, if you understand the binary nature of the rhythmic hierarchy we've already discussed, the rests work in the same fashion. This system of note values and rests functions to dictate the duration of every interval of sound and silence we produce, and for the most part, they're pretty set in stone in that what you see is what you get. There are, however, ways to modify these values so that they hold different amounts of space. This makes writing and reading them more convenient if you understand what the modifier is trying to tell you. Let's take a look at a couple different ones you can expect to see in your musical career. One way to modify the duration of a specific note value or rest is by applying a dot to the right of that note or rest. The dot increases the duration of the note or rest that it's modifying by half of that note value. Let's look at an example to see the dot modifier in action. This is a normal quarter note. As we've already seen in our rhythmic hierarchy, a chord note can be subdivided down into 2 eighth notes, so those eighth notes each hold half the space a chord note does. Therefore, a dotted chord note holds the same amount of space as 3 eighth notes do. 2 eighth notes that a chord note traditionally holds, plus the extra eighth note that half of a chord note holds. Next, let's talk about tuplets. Up until this point, we've discussed the relationship between our note values and rests solely as binary, but music is not always going to be subdivided in this way. Sometimes, for example, we're going to want to divide a chord note down into 3 equal spaces instead of into 2 eighth notes like we've discussed. For cases like this, we're going to use tuplets, which are any rhythm that involves dividing the beat into different number of equal subdivisions from that which are usually permitted by the time signature. As an example, a chord note can be subdivided into 2 eighth notes or into 3 irrational divisions, a set of which is called a triplet. As another example, a chord note can be subdivided down into 4 16th notes or into 5 irrational divisions, a set of which is called a 5-tuplet, or a 5-let. The subject of tuplets can become pretty expansive once you have a broader understanding of music notation, and we'll be delving deeper and deeper into the topic as we continue through the basics. As long as you understand that the possibility of subdivisions that aren't just binary exists, you're on the right track for now. Let's talk about tempo and time signature next. We can all agree that there are songs that are fast, and there are songs that are slow. The speed of a piece of music is formally called its tempo, and tempo is communicated through beats per minute, or BPM. Here's what a tempo marking will typically look like. Tempo markings are made up of 2 parts. The note value on the left tells us what kind of note we are assigning to serve as our beat. The number on the right tells us how many of those beats fit into a minute. Of course, no one is expecting you to try and count 120 beats aloud to try and fit them perfectly into 60 seconds. Instead, you can find out what any tempo sounds like by plugging it into a metronome. Metronomes exist to mark time for you at any tempo you desire. They exist as physical devices, or are recreated digitally through apps you can download on a mobile device or computer. Once you enter your BPM into a metronome, it will begin to click at a certain speed, and every click will correspond to the note type that was assigned to be the beat. To explain the idea of a time signature, let's take a listen to a standard pop beat. There's a chance that upon listening to this, you found yourself engaging the music with your body by tapping your foot or nodding your head along to the pulse. Pay close attention to the way you move and realize that you're mostly making these motions in groups of 4. Check this out by starting at a strong point in the song and count to 4 over and over again along with your head nods or foot taps. You should find that every time you come back to 1, you arrive at another strong point in the music and the cycle begins again. Every time you count a new number, you're counting beats, which are simply a unit of rhythm in music. Because we've counted, we can tell that the beats in this song are grouped into phrases of 4. These groupings can be contained within measures, arbitrary segments of time that are defined by a specific number of beats per segment, which in this case is 4 beats per measure. Imagine trying to read through an essay that has no spaces or punctuation. You'd be looking at a jumble of letters, and it would be almost impossible to derive any meaning from the text. Like punctuation and spacing, measures help keep our music segmented and clear, and if we want to rehearse a specific phrase in the middle of a piece, measures give us distinct points where we can start and stop. Although most pop tunes will adhere to the formula of 4 beats in a measure, not all music will be this clean cut. If a composer is writing a new, original piece that's never been heard before, how would they communicate to the reader how many beats they should expect to see in a measure? They would accomplish this task by using a time signature. Time signatures are composed of 2 numbers stacked vertically like a fraction. The number on top, or the numerator, tells us how many beats are grouped within one measure. This is useful, but knowing only the number of beats in a measure is like being told that the size of a piece of paper is 5 by 6. Without units of measurement like inches or centimeters, the numbers 5 and 6 are essentially meaningless. This is where the bottom number, or denominator, comes into play by telling us the note value we're assigning to be our beat. The denominator gives us this information by indicating what number to divide a whole note by. If the bottom number is a 4, for example, then we're dividing the whole note by 4, and therefore we are assigning a chord note to be our beat. If it's an 8, then we're dividing a whole note by 8, telling us we're assigning an eighth note to be the beat. Here, for example, the numerator is a 5, and the denominator is an 8. This tells us that the type of note we're assigning to be the beat is an eighth note, and there are 5 of them in a measure. A measure that's in 5/8 would look like this. Pay close attention to the way the numbers in the time signature change the type and number of notes in a measure from a measure that's in 4/4. Let's talk about the notation we use to communicate volume next. Dynamics are differences in volume between certain notes or phrases. Imagine yourself listening to a live performance at a concert. While listening to a band or DJ play at their maximum volume might entertain you for a little while, you can probably see how you might eventually lose interest and feel like walking away to take a breather from the constant assault of noise. Dynamics allow us to take our listeners on an emotional roller coaster of loud moments, quiet moments, and everything in between, so they are more likely to stay entertained and engaged, and we indicate these changes in volume using a wide assortment of dynamic markings. The first set of markings communicate information about the volume of a note or an entire phrase, and they range from 2 Ps, or pianissimo, which means very quiet, to 2 Fs, or fortissimo, which means very loud. You'll usually find these dynamic markings under the measure or note they are modifying. The second set of markings indicates gradual shifts in volume from an initial dynamic at a defined starting point to a final dynamic at a defined ending point. A crescendo is a gradual increase in volume and it looks like this, and a diminuendo is a gradual decrease in volume and it looks like this. Accents are the next set of common dynamic markings, and their main purpose in the context of percussion music is to indicate inflections in volume for the notes that they're modifying. Unlike the 2 sets of markings we discussed in the previous page, accents typically only modify one note at a time, as opposed to modifying extended phrases or groups of notes. At this point, you've seen all the forms of music notation that will be relevant to you as you begin your musical career. There are still a few symbols that are a little more complex and not relevant to us just yet, but we'll be sure to cover them when you've developed a knack for this set of notation. For now though, we've reached the conclusion of this chapter of the basics. If you're looking for more in-depth clarification on any of the notation we've talked about here, I encourage you to click on the bassdrumgroup.com link in the top right to be taken to the first book in our basics series, Music Notation. This book contains more than 20 pages of instructional content and additional examples we didn't cover here that are designed to enhance your knowledge of music notation before moving on to reading and interpreting music. It's a great resource to pair with this video if you don't have constant access to the internet as a student, and serves as a great educational tool in a classroom if you're an instructor. You'll also find some sweet gear you can purchase if you're looking to contribute to the growth of this project. As always, all of your love and support is incredibly appreciated. But for now guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to catch you in the next video. Peace.